not just one swan anymore. It's a flock of swans. COVID taught us that end-to-end visibility is key. Being able to understand where critical inventory is placed through our network. Do we have a condition that's starting to show that our shipments are in distress? You have to treat your vendors like partners. It's a bit of a perfect storm all coming together at once.
Hi, I'm Leigh. Welcome to the Connected Cold Chain podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about how geopolitical events impact the pharma supply chain. Today, we'll be talking with Dave, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Leigh. Dave Komjati. I have over 25 years of supply chain logistics experience. I grew up in the pharmaceutical, medical device logistics space. It's been many years of trying to build in critical solutions using innovative new tools, understanding how we can get our medicines to our patients in the right time, right condition, of course, at the right value. I'm here today at the HPCLC conference as a board of director member, and our conference vision is to bring together individuals across the logistics, pharma, healthcare, supply chain industry to educate, build in the right type of thought leadership as we move forward, look for new solutions, and hopefully have collaborative conversations that absolutely helps shape the industry moving forward. So I'm really happy to be here and be able to speak to you about this.
Well, that's great because that's going to lead right into our first question of the day,
Okay.
which is, what lessons did this industry learn during COVID when flexibility and agility had to happen almost overnight that can help support what's going on today from the Black Swan events that we're having, which is about one every 2 years, as well as the geopolitical events that are happening today? How would you say COVID helped get you guys a little bit more nimble or some more resiliency in pharma?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think first and foremost, COVID taught us that end-to-end visibility is key.
Yeah.
Right? And that speed isn't necessarily the most important thing you need. And being able to understand where critical inventory is placed through our network, where we need to position that, and how we can work more broadly with our supply chain partners is a huge part of how we are going to continue to drive a more efficient delivery of the products that save people's lives, and we need to move quickly to be able to integrate that. And I think that's been one of the biggest lessons learned, right? And COVID really was that initial shock that the industry felt. And I think the geopolitical events of today, they're persistent, like you said. It's not just one swan anymore. It's a flock of swans, right? So,
Yes.
They're more persistent. And we are learning now that when these events occur, the muscle from COVID, we can reflex that muscle, right? But we also need to understand that these things are way more persistent. They're multi-layered. Being able to engage with regulators quickly, engage with different supply partners quickly as part of the solution is how we are going to be able to respond and continually be able to respond to what's absolutely more pervasive. When we think through all these different types of geopolitical events that are continuing to happen.
Yeah, you have me thinking now on how pharma has really been in an evolution since the time of COVID, because it really changed the way you had to think about how nimble or agile you are within the supply chain, because overnight things were shut down, people weren't able to go in, but patients still needed their medications.
Yeah.
And so, with that data and the resiliency that you guys have built out over the last couple years since COVID, Do you think it helps you be more nimble moving product around the world when overnight you have to pivot and can't drop into certain airports, or, a cargo ship can't land? There's so many things you have to do to get the flexibility
Yeah.
to adjust. How is that data helping, or that muscle you guys started to flex during COVID help support you?
Yeah, and I think that that's another big change in terms of how have we integrated data to be more useful. Thinking back 5 years ago, these types of risks were certainly risks.
Yeah.
Probably lower probability, high impact, because they are pervasive today and they are multi-layered. Air capacity impact, ocean choke points, freight costs being impacted by fuel that's impacting us, capacity constraints impacting cost. Being able to now monitor and have visibility all the way from the end-to-end supply chain, from our raw material providers through to semi-finished goods, through to finished goods, to the market. Understanding cold chain handoffs between each of those nodes, understanding where our product is it safe? Do we need to act on it? Do we have a condition that's starting to show that our shipments are in distress? Allow us to be proactive versus reactive. And that's where the data is helping. That's where implementing key technology for monitoring throughout the supply chain, having that available to us in a cloud environment that gives us access, not in hours, but now it takes us a minute to understand what's happening in that very moment and be able to react, go back to the planning community, share with them, this is what we're seeing in real time. They can make better decisions. They can start to act more strategically. So that's where the big data and being able to integrate the data has helped. And that's, of course, been a journey over the last several years, working with partners and making sure we get value on the high value, supply critical, patient critical, where we prioritize and we continue to grow and build that into our operating model, if you
Yeah.
will.
That's actually really impressive to think about. The technology has evolved so much that we can literally see exactly where the product is, what temperature it is, what's happening within that space. And then if you do have to reroute it due to geopolitical events, you can track it all the way through the process. It's, the conversation we keep having is, the original house phone that was tethered to the wall
Mm.
versus the cell phone we have today that we live by. And I feel like that's what's happening in pharma is, everybody's starting to get the cell phone. So you can do anything you want, any information you want to pull in. It's just a matter what matters most to you.
Yeah.
And so I'm quite impressed with that conversation on the resiliency, but also the data that helps give you the resiliency.
Yeah, and I think back to the COVID piece. COVID also taught us that we need to start to build risk sensing into our supply chain.
Yeah.
It also taught us that we actually need to start scenario planning. We need to do tabletop exercises, and we need to be ready to respond to something because we've actually practiced responding to it. We're putting playbooks in place, and those types of playbooks are things that allow us to move more quickly. And having that type of sensing capability up the supply chain, knowing where nodes could be impacted due to whether or not it's some sort of fuel crisis, petroleum impacting suppliers in India being able to produce rubber stoppers. All of a sudden now, it's something we can focus on
Yep.
and we can actually react to before there's a real issue of supply. Allows the pivot to happen. One of the other things that just came to mind as you talked about this, understanding how strategic inventory and using inventory as a buffer is a critical lesson learned coming through all of the various disruptions. It allows us to make better decisions, And I think it's something we're going to continue to have to leverage as we move forward with, thinking into the future, these disruptions becoming the norm, like you said.
Yeah. Well, as you're describing this, what I'm hearing is partnerships with your suppliers as well as your own internal stakeholders and how you want to move and, build in that cold chain agility essentially within your model or your processes. How did you see partners that you work with adapt and change through the process as well?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think when you have to treat your vendors like partners. They have to be part of the process. They have real-time strategic insights. I always say boots on the ground,
Yeah.
right? They are in the markets. They are sensing what is occurring. They oftentimes know where critical capacity is, where these cold chain corridors allow us to move product to and through. So when issues occur, our partners become part of the control tower, right? They're not somebody we only rely on when a problem happens, but they're there. They're helping us with the planning, the scenario planning that I spoke about. They are an integral part of how we're going to continue to protect our product, and they need to be part of that.
Yeah, I always see it as a true partnership because they know their, capabilities, where they play best, options that you can flex to as needed. And so in a geopolitical event, you want to understand like where have you done this before?
Right.
Can we adjust? Is this something that we can move, on short notice or alternate, say, where we want to drop product in, or do we need to truck it versus air? Or how do we move it to ocean? There's a lot of conversations that start to happen with those partnerships that really makes the decision speed up.
Yeah. And, if we take the current, Middle East crisis and we think through this as a general geopolitical disruption, and you look at critical hub infrastructure and you think through, there are critical cold chain corridors. And when we move from, let's say, the west coast of the US, and you have LAX to the East Coast, we have JFK, you move over the pond, you get to Western Europe. Plenty of infrastructure in that vicinity and through Amsterdam and Frankfurt. And as you continue to move to the east, you start to see this choke point occurring. And
Yes.
our partners, our 3PLs, our packaging partners, they all understand what's available to us through these corridors. And it's presenting, again, not just a visibility risk to how we use these hubs, but it's decision making. I mean, can pharma resilience, in this particular instance too, pharma supply chain resilience is being tested. Um, Airspace being impacted, freight rates are being impacted with fuel volatility, ocean choke points occurring, regulatory and customs challenges. All of these things are hitting all at once, combined with cold chain logistics. It's a bit of a perfect storm all coming together at once. So it is pressure testing how resilient the pharma supply chains are and how resilient our partners are in responding to helping us solution when we have to pivot.
Yeah.
It's the biggest challenge for us.
So what you just described was no complexity whatsoever.
Exactly. None.
So, I have been in pharma logistics now for a short amount of time, but I've been blown away at how well organized you are and understanding when to pivot, how to pivot, and what else you guys need to do. But I think about you don't plan for overnight an airport shutting down, or you don't plan for loading a container on an ocean ship and then it not being able to move. And so that's where the pivot occurs is how do we adjust? And just as you mentioned on like inventory, since you can't get it off the ocean or it might be stuck at the airport for a certain amount of time, you've got to go back and find other ways to keep the pharma moving.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if there was anything you guys or, your thoughts on how you really, I mean, because you can't predict it. that's the challenging part. You just can't predict it.
Yeah. And so I think this goes back to one of those key lessons of building in risk sensing, but also having those playbooks stood up. Being able to, when a disruption occurs, in real time form tactical SWAT teams. They are looking at what's happening and they're using all the digital data that we have available now to them to make decisions faster.
Yep.
And having those teams available to really at a tactical level initially start to think through, okay, this is how we're going to manage. We have stranded shipments in locations. How do our partners potentially help us do rebookings and filings and going back out and lane solutioning? We can't just rely on static routes, right? We need to be more dynamic and work to build and move things through that. But inside this conversation, it starts to push us towards immediately, what about two weeks? What about 4 weeks? Where do we have inventory buffers? Where do we shift from thinking about something also being regional down to the product level, down to the shipment level as a risk sensing environment? Now,
Yeah.
how do we really plan around those? And again, this just comes back to situational awareness and being able to tactically move through them and then get some visibility to what's coming. And then you start to take all of that data and you bring it forward to start to find out where you need to pivot, where you need to move routes, you need to rebook, maybe use different hubs. It also starts to give you a little bit of an idea of, where do we need to think longer term around broader hub strategies, maybe postponement strategies. So all these little lessons are happening in real time too
Yep.
for a later conversation. But when it's happening, you have to have that muscle still in place, those playbooks in place. You need to execute.
So that actually led me right into my next question, which is, how do you see the next 5 years based on the amount of information we've learned in the previous 5 years due to having so many activities with black swan events between COVID and geopolitical? What else do you think we need to think about or focus on for the future to
Yeah.
help pharma?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about this just in general, I see pharma supply chains continuing to be exposed back to those corridors, those specific cold chain corridors and key infrastructure through the Middle East where, goodness, 22%, I've seen different data representing 22% to 25% of the international air freight moving through three key
Yes.
hubs, right? And Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Doha. And those are key transit points. And, out of that 22%, it's like 20 million tons. And out of that 20 million tons, 300,000 tons is pharma healthcare product moving through there. So when we think about that infrastructure in place, the future becomes one, end-to-end visibility. We do need to continue to invest in our risk resilience platforms. How do we see risk in motion and how do we sense that in real time and how do we react? But also, how do we get to a proactive risk sensing perspective and invest in the right applications? Tell our leadership that we need to also think through some core processes, our core operating principles around supply chain management and data that sits within that ecosystem. So when we need to see it, it's available to us. We can start to actually build that digital shipment and we can model that and we can get into that scenario planning. And I think that there's the other piece to this is this governance piece, right? You need to have the playbooks built up. You need to have them ready to go. And you need to start to think through where that strategic inventory is going to play a critical role based at that product level. You need to have a strong sense for where the patient is going to be impacted. We can't allow geopolitical events to dictate our ability to
Yes.
deliver to the patients. I think it is our responsibility to continue to build up the processes. So the future is We need to continue to build in the processes. We need to continue to build in scenario planning development. We need to invest in that end-to-end visibility. And we need to have senior level discussions on inventory build. There's a cost to all of this. And there's a balance inside of that conversation to operate any company. So, those are the things that we're going to continue to do in the next 5 years for sure. And I'm sure as technology improves, and we'll continue to leverage that to help solution it.
I love that. What I'm hearing is there needs to be cold chain agility. So essentially, not being so dependent on the infrastructure, but figure out how to create different ways to deliver into the same regions when an airport is shut down, an ocean freighter can't get in. There's all of this, almost like a hub and spoke conversation of, all right, we always prefer to go into the hub, but if we can't, how do we pivot and go into other areas and still push it through?
Right.
So I just hear agility.
Agility is a good way to phrase it, and I think maybe just double clicking on it. And I talk about governance and playbooks, but inside of that, there's the connection between your quality teams,
Yeah.
the site manufacturing. What are they doing? The market. How are they working? Do we have inside of our playbooks the ability to pivot our packaging if we need to go from pallet size thermal protection systems down to more small parcel size shipments to support
Right.
patient critical supply? Do we have them validated and ready to go? And vice versa, are we thinking through where we have to maybe pivot away and look towards something else because it's not as critical within our SKU level, data?
Yeah. I must say, you talk about it in such a confident way because it sounds like you're actively exploring solutions, making sure, planning ahead and being proactive. Is there anything you think right now that might prevent you from moving forward? Or there's something you're like, gosh, if I only had this would change how I look at cold chain agility?
So I think more broadly over the last 5, 6 years, the things that may have prevented us is this idea of investing in certain platforms that are going to give us a risk, and that risk is maybe low probability, and it's maybe sometimes a high investment. I think that's shifted. I think that's shifted. I think the things that are going to continue to maybe prevent us from being more agile, as you said, is when we think through, let's say, a multi-hub scenario, and we think about de-risking. This comes at a cost to the business sometimes. So it's creating business cases that make sense from a cost of capital, as well as a sustainability, as well as a risk tolerance perspective on how we see ourselves operating.
Yeah.
And so that's a big conversation to have, and it takes senior leadership across the pharma and healthcare industry to want to understand that this is something we need to do, because back to the start, this isn't a black swan event that we can live through one time.
Right.
I mean, these are happening constant.
Yeah.
They're chronic disruptions.
Yeah. I just can't help but think as you're talking about that is we want end-to-end visibility. We want, a better understanding of our options, right? To give us that agility. But what does it look like when you really start thinking about how much data you guys have at your fingertips now? And can that data help you be more efficient, make better decisions, and maybe potentially drive out cost, but also still give you flexibility? I mean, that's no small ask.
No, it's not. And I think, one of the things we need to be able to do is leverage that data as part of a broader set of value propositions that we get. So I think there's a lot of opportunity inside of that data from day to day. And so as you build up your digital infrastructure and your digital stack, and you think through how you're connecting your forwarders and you're connecting your thermal protection systems and monitoring of devices, and you are now getting this mountain of data. How do we deliver that every day in a way that helps the business make decisions every day on basic decisions, lead time impact on key lanes? What is the risk of not achieving critical
Yeah.
lead times? We have broader initiatives that aren't as disruptive, but present equal challenges when we think through how do we move from air to ocean? How do we leverage data where we see higher volumes, choke points, to have other conversations across supply chain and logistics that support moving forward? Um, there's insights. And so, how do you continue to glean all of the insight out of there?
Mhm.
And I think inside of this is also a bit of a data quality evolution conversation. That's another risk inside of how this looks, because we can be really good at doing a small portion really
Yeah.
well and investing a lot of time, energy, and effort into having that data pristine. As you scale to global networks and you want to have global insights, sometimes that data requires a lot of additional, I don't want to say massaging, but maintenance and
Yeah.
management. There's gaps there that you
Yeah.
need to continue to fill in. So, it's an evolution of how you use it and show the value of it more broadly.
And this is a little bit off topic, but as you're talking, the amount of sophistication you've built into, how you think about the business and growing up in pharma logistics, did you think you would ever have this much level of data at your fingertips?
Not this way.
Ah,
And it's funny. I mean, logisticians have historically been that group that provides deep insights based on questionable data. Lots of data. We are always pulling it together so we can share with leaders key information to help build up a strategic roadmap and path on key volumes and lanes and build it into a pallet down to a small parcel. And it's always like been that challenge. And historically, it's always been the same kind of equation. Like, we need data from the transportation. We need order level data down to the SKU level. We also want product health level data. And thinking back in my career 20 years ago, IoT devices, just they weren't discussed.
yeah.
So this is evolving technology. So to answer your question, there is some shock that this level of data exists now, and we are able to intervene, actually see the temperature moving in the wrong direction
Yeah.
as it moves physically through the transportation chain, and work with your partners to intervene
Yeah.
and make a difference in the outcome of that product. And it has changed ways of working. Historically, if stuff would arrive with a temperature excursion and has to go through a quality release process that could take several weeks and quality was blinded to it, they now know it's coming with an event that occurred.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, they can go through their process with all of this data and have the product released because they know that the stability data is now integrated. They can look at where the event happened. They
Yeah.
know the time, duration it happened. It's there. It's moving faster. So, yeah, in some ways I'm shocked, and in some ways it's the same data that I was always after anyway. So
Isn't that interesting
it
how
is.
it works? I can't help but think about it as I hear you talk about the data and the evolution of pharma logistics and how you've participated in it for such a long time, that when you're in it and it's changing, it feels slow. But then when you pull back and look at it from a distance, you're like, wow, how far have we come in a short amount of time?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, and it speaks to technology. It speaks to the evolution of technology and us being able to keep pace. I think pharmaceutical industry, speaking in that particular vertical, lots of compliance and regulation, and they've been used to moving at a particular pace that isn't the technology pace that's available to us in other ways on the digital front.
right.
So layering in new technologies that's evolving in 6-month and 12-month increments that you could potentially leverage and use for value
Yeah.
is a part of that agility challenge and also part of that new business case modeling for value that needs to be part of the discussion.
Yeah. You know, as how do I want to phrase this question? I've got to think about it for a second because I think what you're saying is really important, but I'm also trying to understand how this data, while it's made us more nimble, it's made us more agile, and we know we need more data or the evolution of the data to provide more insights into what we're doing. Um, how we want to incorporate that and how the data doesn't actually bog us down because we have too much data.
Yeah.
That's how I think about it sometimes is like, when you can monitor everything at any point in time and, all day, 24 hours a day, that's almost too much data to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
So I didn't know how you guys think about how you kind of capture your data or if there's specific pieces that you want to focus on more so than others.
So this goes back to the solution at scale. We're really good at let's solution this one lane, these 30 lanes, and let's monitor them against a set of particular KPIs and any deviation from that. But now if we want to overlay that to 1,000+ lanes and we want to allow for key business rules to govern our actions, the aperture gets wider. And I think it does become, first and foremost, a prioritization conversation.
Yep.
You need to understand what's supply critical, what's patient critical, high value. That helps point you in the right direction on where you need to look first and where you need to ensure your data structure and your digital platform and your strategy is going to deliver real value to you and the patients. So there's some prioritization that needs to take place because at scale, you do start to see sometimes things fraying around the edges. But I think as we move forward to, the opportunity is to continue to think through how do we leverage new technologies? Is there a way to leverage agentic AI to support some of the data processing side?
Yeah.
Some more automation that sits inside of there that will keep us still at the tip of what's important and focused on what's important without creating too much noise, right? I mean, one of the biggest fears we had when we started to think through how do we show a risk score for what we're moving through the network, which I called risk in motion, was I don't want to send an alert if a cyclone is moving through the South Pacific.
Yep.
And we have a container on an ocean vessel that's 1,000 kilometers away. How do we create the right business rules to reduce what could be a false positive or a false negative,
Yep.
Coming through as an alert, which then could generate work to be done. Please go check, and people having to respond in real time. So there's an opportunity to continue to rationalize all this data as we move forward with more sophisticated business rules and how we want to build that into the operating model on the digital side anyway. And at the end of the day too, I think there's I've coined a phrase AI versus HI, right? Like where does the human interaction become more critical? And I think if you can filter out the noise of all that data that you're referring to, or at least I think that's what you were
Yep.
hinting at, right?
Yeah.
If you can filter out all of that noise and get what's important to them, then you get immediate agility in action. You can really take that and do something with it.
That was great. And that was exactly where I was going is I love that conversation on the human intervention because just because you can collect the data doesn't necessarily mean you need the data, but data matters.
Right.
Since you're a board member of HPCLC, which is a healthcare logistics conference, tell me a little bit about how HPCLC has been focusing on adjusting and adapting considering all the geopolitical events that have happened. I know we just pivoted a little bit away from the data conversation to bring it back to our geopolitical initial conversation, but I wanted to understand, how you guys as thought leaders within the industry are thinking about agility within cold chain during these geopolitical events?
Yeah, HPCLC and the group of professionals have, goodness, hundreds of years of combined experience, and they understand that the global infrastructure at a macro level is a conversation that we need to have. And I think one of the things that we're able to do immediately is start to build out this global map of how freight is moving globally, where are the choke points, and then be able to start to raise not just awareness, but what solutions support moving through there, because we have a group of shippers and manufacturers really close to our 3PL partners who are connected to the ocean carriers, the air freight carriers. We have thermal protection system vendors and partners who are here, who understand extended capabilities of solutions. And we have digital vendors who are here that understand how data can help continue to build in,
Yep.
educate shippers, educate the community at large on how to move through disruptive events, and then talk through them, right? And I think that's one of the things in terms of a mission, from educating and continuing to promote the particular challenges we have within the healthcare logistics space. Pharma in general is becoming more time sensitive, more cold chain sensitive, temperature sensitive. Again, the infrastructure and cold and corridors are becoming more constrained during these types of disruptive events. So we really do get to talk through some strategic alignment around how do we pivot, and how do we make that visible, and then how do we take that back to our leaders? How do we start to package this and create some sort of unified message on elevating the industry and taking all of this feedback and making a change, right? Making that actual changes occur, whether it's direct charters that now we see may need to be stood up. And as there are broader conversations on where they go and how do we manage, do we need different hubs in certain locations? We're here focused on Latin America, and we learned a lot today from the governor on what Puerto Rico means, not just for the island, but for the United States as a manufacturer, as a producer, and how they also are a key potential hub for the rest of Latin America, and in particular, maybe some parts of Europe. These are the conversations that drive change and elevate the community.
Perfectly said. This is my second HPCLC conference that I've attended, and I've really learned so much each time I've attended. And I love the variety of topics because it helps me understand the logistics space and areas that I don't necessarily focus on. So it's really beneficial. And I appreciate, all the effort that you guys put in as board members to help support and drive the conversations within the industry.
Thank you. It is a passion project, but it's one that gives us a lot of value: peer-to-peer connection, thought leaders, innovation, ideas, and again, just improving the industry as a whole. So
Yeah.
it's great. So thank you.
Well, good. Well, the passion definitely comes across. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Dave, for speaking today. As always, I learn each and every time I talk to you. I get a better understanding of, what we need to think about and the next steps within the industry. And I look forward to, our paths crossing through the future.